Hi, hello. I just wanted to pop in quickly. I don't really know why this came up in my head, but I thought I'd do a little bit of a retrospective on the last 2 months of my casual movie watching and pose a couple of movies that I think you should check out if you've never seen them before. This isn't necessarily a review of these movies. I don't really have a lot of structured thoughts on them. I haven't given necessarily a lot of thought on any of these movies in particular, but I liked what I saw and would want somebody else to maybe catch some strays from that experience. So I'm just going to go over some of the movies that I watched in January and in February. And yeah, if you're interested in any of them, I'd recommend checking them out. These are mostly going to be older movies. I apologize for that. But like the first one I want to go with is Queen Christina. Queen Christina is the 1933 film. Yeah, 1933 film starring Greta Garbo as the Queen of Sweden. Her performance is just tremendous in it, and it probably has some of the more famous close-up shots of Greta Garbo if you're into that sort of stuff. She also just gives an incredibly wry and modern performance, I'd say, despite playing a historical character. I've never released this video on it, but I did a video on Garbo's interpretation of Anna Karenina, and I think she has very kind of modern sensibilities, especially her iconic laugh, but the way that she interprets some line readings, the ways that she's very like reactionary as a performer. She takes in the things that other people says and gives her kind of wry interpretation of what her character may be thinking about the words that they're saying, and where other actors may be more sort of rote or more sort of neutral in their interpretation or their reactions. She definitely always has a thought on her mind. So I think that's great. And I think Queen Christina has one of the sexier, chaste depictions of the 30s, and also one of the most romantic close-ups in cinema history. Blah, 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 blah. Night in the City, Jules Dassin film. I keep wanting to say his name as if he's French. Jules Dassin. He's from Connecticut. Jules Dassin film from 1950. It's great. It's just a great crime caper movie. I also watched the remake starring Robert De Niro, and that was not good. That was directed by somebody in the like Scorsese sphere, like one of his producers, Irwin Winkler, I think, directed it, and it's just not good. One of the most terrible sex scenes I've seen in a movie in a while. Clearly written by a person who doesn't have great sex, in my opinion. But Night in the City, the movie proper, is great, and I actually found myself bouncing around that one of the actresses, seeing her in a bunch of stuff as a result.
200 quid.
Googie Withers? Is that her? Yeah, Googie Withers. I ended up realizing I had seen her in Lady Vanishes, Dead of Night, and It Always Rains on Sunday. She's great. And Herbert Lom is one of my favorite character actors of that era. He slept with Maya Zetterling, which is just insane to me, but dude can pull. He's a tremendous actor, and Night in the City is a tremendous movie. You get to see the criminal underground of London, and you can actually see it as like an underground network, like systematized and hierarchical in the ways that this kind of like this world has its own infrastructure, and everybody kind of knows and recognizes and plays with and against each other. With Nail and I is a British film from the 1980s, 87, directed by Bruce Robinson, based on his own kind of experiences growing up in the late 60s and early 70s, coming up in the late 60s and early 70s in London. And it's just a fascinating buddy movie, just great, interesting dynamics between the two. They're like... their rampant arrogance, their suspicion of small village people, and the kind of interesting dynamics of I don't really want to say latent homosexuality.
Anyway.
More so the relationship of intense affection and to a certain degree attraction or identification that young men have as they mature, and the in-between space in which they navigate from that era into the era of kind of like nuclear family and affluence and coming into their identity, their socially acceptable identity, and the kind of shedding off of those former relationships and that former intensity. I think it's a relationship that's characterized well in movies such as California Split, as featured on this channel. I think California Split has one of the great male friendships depicted in film, as well as Banshees of Inisherin is something that goes into this dynamic as well. The passing of this relationship, this type of relationship. I also watched that recently. I like that. So yeah, With Nell and I, you should definitely check it out. Two of the great performances of British cinema, certainly, and I think Richard E. Grant gives one of the great performances in general. Cabaret I rewatched in preparation for I Am a Camera. Cabaret, there's nothing that needs to be said about Cabaret. I can't imagine what it would be like to be like the audience member who's the right age to have watched and loved Judy Garland, and to be able to see like that her mannerisms, her voice to a certain degree manifested in this totally new person. Like one of the great gifts of film watching, I can imagine, is being a lifelong fan of Judy Garland and then seeing Liza Minnelli just come out with all of the gifts born anew. Tremendous. And yeah, an interesting thing about Cabaret, watching it again after such a long time, they introduced the character of Sally Bowles like 3 times, I'd say. And it's really interesting. The first time they introduce her, she's part of the introductory song, the Willkommen. And they don't even like name or announce her. She's in the back of the chorus. And you just kind of like, there's one shot that actually showcases her, but you kind of have to actually know who she is in order to see that's what's happening. And then she's introduced again in a song format. And then she's finally introduced as the character of Sally Bowles in her real life, as opposed to as the Cabaret performer. And it's just such an interesting way to frame that character. The act of seeing with one's own eyes. Oh my gosh, I've been getting so into Stan Brakhage. I would not recommend this if you don't have a strong constitution. It's showing autopsies, and Stan Brakhage just has a fierce curiosity for the world, for the human body, for the systems with which we use to care for, treat, humanize, and dehumanize the human body. And this is a fascinating investigation into that. Just remarkable. Such one of the most remarkable filmmakers I've ever seen. White Material's 2015 film by Claire Denis. It's about a white woman in Africa who is trying to sustain her family's coffee plantation in the midst of a political coup. It's something that you have to experience to really kind of know and understand. I think nominally we can understand the structures of the crisis, the tension between colonialists and African people over the course of the 20th century. I think this depicts it in a much more on the ground, personalized way, especially coming from Denis, who grew up in Africa, in across many colonies in Africa growing up, and it just has this specific touch of her lens of fascination and ambivalence towards like African rebel fighters, the corrupt government, and the relationship between like not armies but people, like everyday African people and their white colonizers, who are also the everyday people, who are not the people who are in charge, or are not the people who are enforcing or inflicting violence upon these people, but are nonetheless a member of the structure that has brutalized these people and has commodified these people and has created a relationship of imbalance. It's an interesting movie. It's 2009. It's not 2015. I'm thinking of Let the Sunshine In, which is not 2015. It's 2017. Morocco, 1930 film by Joseph von Sternberg, starring Marlene Dietrich. It's fascinating. It's if you view it from a 2023 lens, it almost seems like a movie that really has 1 or 2 standout scenes and a lot of kind of filler in between. The standout scenes are tremendous, amazing. Some of the greatest things committed to celluloid. I think most people know Morocco for the Cabaret scene where Amy Dolly does her drag performance. The last sequence is truly made of something else. The final sequence of the film has reached me to the degree of Roman Holiday, and I really don't say that of a lot of films. Roman Holiday is one of my favorite films. And I have one more that I want to recommend, but I want to interject one in between there, and that's Fatso. That's like a 1982. It's a 1980 film directed by Anne Bancroft and starring Dom DeLuise. It's about an overweight man who's trying to curtail his eating habits after the death of a family member, and it's not a good movie. I wouldn't say it's a good movie, but it's Anne Bancroft's one and only directorial effort, and it's really interesting to see the lens in which she puts on it, what her interests are as a filmmaker, as an artist, and we don't usually get to see this side of a celebrity or a star or an actor taking on the directorial role, and if we do, it's usually something boring, but the aspect of Anne Bancroft's identity that she wishes to present in Fatso is really interesting. I think like you really get that Anne Bancroft is an Italian coming from New York from Fatso. There's a wonderful sensitivity to the Italian American experience in Fatso. There is a way of communication in the movie between the characters that feels really familial, that feels personalized to Bancroft's own upbringing. There's a warmth and understanding about people who are overweight that, I'm going to be honest, feels a little bit like boring in a dramatic sense, but is comparatively really human to stories about overweight people from mainstream media and from film. And I want to say that a little like nuance, a little point of differentiation in this is that this isn't a film about fat people from a fat person's perspective. It's not a fat filmmaker who's making this about their own experience. This is about somebody who knows and loves fat people. And I think that's really interesting. And it's I wouldn't say it's a captivating performance by Dom DeLuise, but it's a very, very different type of performance from Dom DeLuise. And finally, I'm not really going to say much about this one because it's just you should just watch it yourself. Late Spring. It's a 1949 film by Yasujiro Ozu. You should check it out. I really can't say I really don't even know my own thoughts about this film. It's just incredibly powerful. The performance by Setsuko Hara is bewitching. You never expect to see as many different faces as she presents in this movie. The movie is really surprising. It shows characters who are strong in ways that we don't expect them to be, and fragile in ways that we would have never thought. It shows them being strong in terms of being forceful or being evasive in ways that we don't expect, and it shows them being fragile in ways that are recognizable and familiar, but you'd never expect to see depicted on the screen, honestly. The movie has so much to say about intergenerational struggles, about Japan's sense of identity after the war. I think those are all like really interesting sociological and narrative things about it, but I think you could take away those things without really knowing about Japan's history during this time or about the specifics of its culture. Really, the thing I want to say about Late Spring is that filmmaking is a medium of hyperbole. Like, you try and wring out things into their most forceful and their most dramatic and their most extreme in order to really spell out what the story or what the theme is in order to affect an audience. You create a narrative. You create something that is exaggerated to make a point. And I think sometimes the point is lost in that exaggeration. The audience sees it as a story and doesn't really see it as something that is natural or fundamental to their own life. Something that I see in Late Spring is that it's so true to the real struggles of life, and it's so resistant to over-dramatizing that or exploiting it. And at the end, you're left with a film that has such strong underlying tension, the tension of real life, the tensions that we as a society, as families, as individuals can never really reconcile. That it's a movie that's almost agonizing in its depiction. Like, you almost can't fully digest the movie because it's forcing you to confront real unresolvable tensions in your own life. I can't really say more about I don't really want to say more about it. It's a very early contender in just the best movie I've seen all year. It's only February. So yeah, that was a couple of movies that I've liked from the past 2 months. I think you should check them out if you haven't before. If you've already checked them out, you should tell me why my interpretations are wrong, and then go rewatch them again.
Oh, so.
Yeah, I don't care. As long as you're watching the movies, who gives a fuck? Yeah, anyways, sign up for my Patreon. Yeah, I've got a lot more stuff planned for there. So yeah, sign up. And until next time, keep watching good movies.